What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Titan Season 1, Episode 11, which is the season finale of the first season, titled Dick Grayson. So, this episode was a season finale, and what a season finale is supposed to do, basically, is, at least in a superhero TV show, really show the main villain facing off against our heroes and tie up a lot of loose ends. You could also start new storylines at the end of the season in the season finale, but the season finale should 100% every single time tie up loose ends and have a big showdown between the main villain and the main hero, or at least some sort of argument between the characters, because in this episode, and while I did really enjoy this episode entirely, and we'll get to that after this point right here, but this episode was a terrible season finale. This episode didn't have any big showdown between the main villain and the main hero. Like Trigon, he was in the dream world quite a bit, and he did influence it a lot so that Dick doesn't leave Gotham, so that he can succumb to the darkness. But outside of that, he didn't do anything whatsoever. He wasn't in any fights, and I know this would be a little bit above budget, but if it is above budget, then just don't introduce Trigon for now. Maybe wait until it's cheaper, because CGI gets easier and easier to use over the years. But Trigon, I would have loved to see him turn into his demon form and fight the Titans, even though also I don't like the fact that they introduced him so early into the show, because if the Titans do fight him, they could only go down from there in terms of villains. But now that they did introduce him, it would have been cool to see him fight the Titans. Instead, he just has this dream world, he influences the dream world, and he gets Dick as a servant, and I just don't think that as a season finale, it did the main villain justice whatsoever. Outside of that, the storylines of this season, not a single one of them was resolved. In fact, 2 new storylines were created in this episode, and none of them were resolved. The whole storyline with Raven and Trigon and that relationship and that whole storyline, really, that wasn't resolved at all. Starfire and her origin story, or her motivation, or her evil side motivation, or the side that wants to kill Raven, that wasn't resolved at all. Beast Boy really being a darker version of himself, and I don't know anything about Beast Boy, wasn't resolved at all. I mean, Beast Boy was barely in this episode, and so was Raven, really. And as for Dick Grayson, his storyline was, I guess, technically resolved in a way that we didn't expect, which is that he did succumb to the darkness after, I guess, 5 years of, or what it seemed to him to be 5 years of Trigon trying to influence him to succumb to that darkness. But that is not a resolved storyline. In fact, him becoming a servant of Trigon is a new storyline. On top of that, they created a new storyline with Superboy at the end of the episode, which, don't get me wrong, I love that tease, but they didn't resolve any storylines, and they created new storylines, which, works for like a mid-season finale. In fact, if this was a mid-season finale, it would be amazing. But this is a season finale, and as a season finale, it is legitimately horrible. And I do think that the reason this episode is such a bad season finale, and yet such an incredible possible mid-season finale, and also a pretty incredible penultimate episode to the season, or possible penultimate episode, is because I'm pretty sure this episode was not originally supposed to be a season finale. Originally, we were told this season would have 13 episodes, which I think it should have had, but then we were told it would have 12 episodes, and then, like a couple days before the season started, or a couple days or maybe I think in middle of the season, we were told that the season would be cut down to 11 episodes, and obviously they made that decision way long ago when the season was filming and maybe writing, but I'm not sure about the writing part, because it's possible that they wrote the entire season and then the people behind the DC Universe were like, we have to really cut this season down, so maybe just show the actual season finale, or what was supposed to be the season finale, in season 2, because if you look at the schedule of the DC Universe, there won't be many weeks that they won't be releasing new episodes of original content. Right after Titans ends, a couple weeks later, they're releasing Young Justice Outsiders, which I am pretty excited for, but I think the reason they cut this season down is because they wanted some leg room, or some room for people to really get excited for Young Justice Outsiders without watching Titans at the same time. So they might have cut down the season from 13 to 12 and then to 11, which is why, in my opinion, this episode turned out to be the season finale, and yet it doesn't really feel like it was written as a season finale. It feels like it was written as maybe a penultimate episode, maybe the third to last episode of the season, but definitely not a season finale, and I think that that is the reason this episode is not nearly as good as it could have been, and this season in general is not nearly as good as it could have been. And I think that I'm no marketing expert. I know nothing about that in terms of the quality of this season. If this was the reason that they really cut down the season, then that was a huge mistake for this actual season. So disregarding the fact that this is a season finale for the rest of this video, all the way up to the conclusion part of the review, I do think that the concept of the dream world in this episode was executed rather well. I do think that they focused more on the relationship between Dick and Batman rather than the actual dream world, because most of the time these dream world concepts in superhero TV shows or movies or whatever are usually pretty great. Like the main, really the first version of this concept was in the Superman story For the Man Who Has Everything, which was adapted in the Justice League Unlimited cartoon as well as on Supergirl, but it wasn't very good on Supergirl. In the Justice League Unlimited cartoon, however, it was incredible. It shows Superman and his dream life, but then in the end he has to give it all up because he has responsibilities in his real life, and it was incredibly emotional, incredibly well done. Here, they didn't really focus on that aspect, which I think they could have done just to make this episode maybe a little bit more emotional by the time it ended, but I guess that's not what they were going for, so that is fine. In terms of the actual relationship between Dick and Batman, and the real main focus of this episode, which is Dick succumbing to the darkness that he believes Batman is filling him with in this season. And since that is what they were going for, I think they executed it rather well in this episode. Everything building up to Dick and Bruce Wayne facing off with each other in this episode, or at least the, not really fight between the two, but really the argument between the two and the fracturing of their relationship between the two, even though this is a dream world and it seems like they really haven't talked to each other in like 10 years. Even in this world, it still feels like that these two are or have a strong relationship, and that is obviously fractured at the end when Dick actually kills him. I think that everything building up to the ending and the climax of the episode, it was genuinely great. I do think, however, that the first 30 minutes, nothing really happened. I think that they definitely could have crammed everything into a much shorter screen time. Then we could have seen more of everything that happened outside of the dream world, and we wouldn't have gotten all these boring scenes like Dick checking into a hotel, stopping a domestic violence act, and seeing the Joker die, but then he's not dead. I do think that this episode definitely dragged out this storyline. It could have been so much shorter, and we could have been resolved. It could have really resolved a lot of other things outside of it, but in general, in the actual dream world, like everything that was happening in the last 12 to 10 minutes of the episode, that was intense, that was great. It was also seeing Batman as well, and although I didn't expect them to end it this way, I do think that the resolution, or at least not really the resolution, but the continuing of Dick's storyline, that was a resolution that, although I didn't love, it was something that I didn't expect, and I do think that they could definitely do something with it in Season 2, although I would have just preferred him to really not succumb to the darkness and just become Nightwing, which at this point now, I'm just expecting them to do this in the second half, or the first half of Season 2, and if they are, that's fine, but I just would have loved to see it at the ending of this season. It would have been a great ending to the character arc and an incredibly satisfying ending to the season. Also, on a final note, I do think that this episode looked incredibly good. I think whenever an episode looks this cinematic in any TV show, it really elevates the episode because, you know, the visuals of any episode is definitely a big part of how good it is. So that was definitely something I loved in this episode. All the cinematography, the way things were shot, the look of the episode, and just the cinematic feel of this episode. And then there was also the Superboy tease at the end, which also, although it was a new storyline being created while other storylines were not ended, that was unfortunate for the actual season, but I actually did like the Superboy tease quite a lot. I did notice Superman was being mentioned quite a lot in this episode. I probably should have put 1 and 3 together and came to the conclusion that they were setting up Superboy. Either way, this is pretty exciting in Season 2. In conclusion, this episode had so many great things about it, like the concept just being executed very well, Batman showing up, the look of the episode, very top-notch, really cinematic, it was intense, it was tense as well, and the ending, the tease, was great as well, with Superboy as well as Krypto, which I didn't mention him a little bit ago, but the score and my final thoughts on the episode are crippled, and entirely crippled, by the fact that it is a season finale. It doesn't do any of the things a season finale should do. It just doesn't make for a satisfying ending for a season. Now, sure, a season can end on a cliffhanger, but also with that cliffhanger, you have to bring resolutions to storylines, and you have to really tie up loose ends, or else what's the point of calling them seasons aside from just really when they were aired and the long breaks between them? So I hate to do this, but I would give this episode a 7.5 out of 10. If you guys are wondering, if this wasn't a season finale, if this was a mid-season finale, it would get an easy 10 out of 10. If it was a penultimate episode, probably around a 10 out of 10, maybe closer to 9.5. But it is a season finale, unfortunately, so it gets a 7.5 out of 10. But anyway, let me know your thoughts about this episode in the comments down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.